Hello, everyone. My name is Nick.
And I'm Quinn.
And welcome to the Quick Podcast. Today we are talking about the root factions and where they rank on a tier list. For those who are unfamiliar with the tier list system, it goes from S to D, S being the highest, D being the lowest. Similar to grades in school, just S is above A. We shall be going through the factions in release order, beginning with the Marquise de Cat.
Marquis de Cat are famously known as the face of the game, and they have a very high board presence at the start of the game. However, I believe that their point gain can begin to fall off a little bit, meaning that I would probably put them in high C or low B.
I would put them in C tier because their point gain is decent and their start games are pretty good. They can become a powerful presence. But they simply lack the action economy to deal with point game in the end game where it counts most.
I agree.
Next faction is the Eyrie Dynasty. Where would you place them?
I personally would place them in the high B tier. They have a decent action economy, and they can play pretty well, especially in terms of attack. I simply think that their point gain is outmatched by a few other factions that end up playing better or being stronger in the long run.
I would put them in low A tier, as in my opinion they are the best balanced faction in the game, but they're not the best at winning the game. Their decree is really good, but it can collapse on you quickly.
Completely understandable.
For our next faction, we have the Woodland Alliance. Where would you place them?
Woodland Alliance, I would place in the A tier. I think they can be quite powerful. Even though they start off with no board presence, they can have huge bursts of points, especially in the late game, that few other factions can really match.
Yes, I agree. Their bursting is really good, and their crafting and just point scoring ability in general are really good. Them winning can be an inevitability if others do not outrace them, especially near the end. Where would you place them?
A tier.
Same. Next up, we have the Riverfolk expansion, and starting off our Riverfolk factions is the Riverfolk themselves, the Otters.
The Otters, I would say, are a decently strong class. However, their board and point scoring is very limited if other players choose not to interact with them using their main shop mechanic, meaning that I would probably place them in the B tier.
I would probably place them low B or high C tier. They're a good faction, but they've been nerfed. They were the only ones to be nerfed by Adset, and they can only score 12 points from their board, making them have to make the rest up through crafting.
I think that would make me move them down to C tier, probably right above Marquis.
Our next faction from the Riverfolk expansion is the Lizard Cult. He has not played them, so you don't have anything to say, right?
Very true.
I've played them a few times. They kind of play like gambling. They can score, but their scores are not that high. You can have turns, but you're reliant on the discard pile for your crafting and for your movement in battle, which makes this faction fairly weak. I would put them in C tier, below the Riverfolk, above the Cats.
I think that is very apt.
Underrolled factions time. We begin with the Moles. Where would you place them?
The Moles, I personally would place in A tier. I think they're very powerful. They've got good action economy and a lot of different venues with which to score points. However, I definitely think just maybe one or two other factions are slightly better.
I would personally place the Moles in S tier. They are a really good faction. Their scoring and action economy are amazing, and they have probably the most strategies out of any faction. You want to go S tier or A tier?
I could see them going to S.
Next up, we have the Corvid Conspiracy.
Now, I hate to say it because I love this class, but they are by far the worst in the game. They have the hardest method of scoring points, and it is simply too easy to thwart
You
them
also
as another
suck
class.
at them.
I do suck at them, but
You keep placing bombs when you should be placing extortion.
I think the bombs are fun, and I think that even though they're incredibly fun to play, that they do definitely deserve D tier because I've only seen them get a win once or twice out of dozens and dozens of games where I know they've been played.
If I had to put anyone in D tier, it might be them, but I personally would put them in C above the Cats.
I would put them below the Cats, but I see how you could think otherwise.
Let's go with C tier below the Cats.
All right.
Compromise.
Works for me.
It appears we've forgotten the Vagabond.
Ooh, the Vagabond, one of the base 4 factions, I would argue, is the best in the game.
By far. Its point scoring is everywhere. They have the most diversity in play styles, and infamy scoring is scary. Vagabond, S tier.
Yes, indeed.
Now we have the Marauders factions. We're beginning with the Keepers in Iron.
Now, the Keepers in Iron's biggest issue is that they make no sense to play. They are very complex. They've got a very powerful attack, arguably one of the best combats in the game. However, their point scoring is very inconclusive and is much more difficult to keep track of than some other classes.
Their point scoring is difficult to keep track of. They are the most confusing. Like, I would never give Iron Keepers to the new player. But I'd have to put them in A tier because when they score, they score.
That is very true.
And finally, the last faction currently released is the Rats. Where do we put the Rats?
Rats are my personal favorite class in the game, and they have some of the most powerful attack. I'd put them in A tier.
Thank you for watching.